What is up? What is up, YouTube? How are you guys doing? Golly. I cannot believe all the cover-ups. I guess all governments all over the world look and hire the most professional liars. That rhyme. They look and hire the most professional liars to help cover up what they don't want you to see. Man, are you serious? Can we get some truth out of somebody? Especially when it comes to the kids, man. This is part 2 right here. About the daycare. Oh my gracious, man. This part 1. If y'all ain't seen part 1, please go check out part 1. That thing had me in disbelief. So this is part 2. Y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. It's gonna be one more part. It's gonna be 2 more parts to this because we try to keep it at least an hour. So sit back and enjoy this 1 hour. If you ain't seen part 2, if you ain't seen part 1, this is part 2. So hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Hey, let's check this bad boy out. Where's my mouse? Here we go.
I'm also going to note that at the time that this article was written, in the middle of 1988, these structures were still standing on the Presidio campus. As of today, they are gone. This abandoned bunker complex would go on to be a key part of this story. You see, emblazoned next to the Prince of Darkness graffiti inside of that abandoned bunker was the word die and what looked like a list of names painted in red that had been crossed out with heavy black paint. One wall was covered with the numerals 666, a sign of the devil, and a cult. They're gone. This abandoned bunker complex would go on to be a key part of the story. You see, emblazoned next to the Prince of Darkness graffiti inside of that abandoned bunker was the word die and what looked like a list of names painted in red that had been crossed out with heavy black paint. One wall was covered with the numerals 666, a sign of the devil, and occult drawings. There was also a clearing in the center of the concrete floor, where the ground was exposed, that was filled with refuse and partly burned logs. On the front wall beneath the window that faced the military intelligence building was a huge, expertly painted pentagram inside of a circle. And in the rear, where the sunlight gave way to darkness, white and black candle drippings sat atop a dome-shaped recession in the wall, apparently a crude sort of altar. Incense sticks were also found inside of this abandoned bunker, half burned to the side. So people on the Presidio campus discovered this completely creepy abandoned satanic bunker, thought nothing of it. At another abandoned battery farther up Lincoln Boulevard, a large drawing of Satan with red eyes and horns appeared one night on an outside concrete wall.
Hey guys, thank you for watching our videos. If you want to check out our live channel, the Music Recording Network Live, where we dive deeper into videos that we put up and talk about different things that's going on in the world. You can participate in our chat or you can come on live. You don't even have to show your face. Go to our live channel, subscribe, voice your opinion, because we would like to hear from you and help us come up with solutions. Now, let's continue on with this video.
Doors to the battery at the time were supposedly secured shut. There were no windows to climb through, and no entry was possible there.
Joseph, we've agreed to conceal your identity, but you are an officer in the United States Army.
That's correct.
And you were an officer in the United States Army during the time you were a member of this satanic organization.
Yes.
Did the authorities at the Presidio know that a satanic organization was active on their base during the time that you were a member?
They were very much aware of it, yes.
The present base commander, Colonel Rafferty, says that today at least,
I know of no satanic activities whatsoever in this area.
Satanism may be a constitutionally protected religion, but similar to another recent case at the...
You lying like a mother. I could just feel, I know of no. You lying, cuz you lying, man. You know you lying. You don't know of it, but you heard of it. You heard other people talk about it. You heard the he say, she say. You know about the grapevine. I heard it through the grapevine. Everybody knows. You gonna sit there and say, I don't know nothing about it. Yes, you do. You ain't got no documentation on it, but you know. Sit here and gonna lie. I can't believe these people. You are lying at you. Everybody, all the managers, the supervisors, the captains, the lieutenants, they know to talk around the talk. hate when a mother straight up lies. You know you lying.
Authorities at the Presidio know that a satanic organization was active on their base during the time that you were a member.
They were very much aware of it, yes.
The present base commander, Colonel Rafferty, says that today, at least,
I know of no satanic activities whatsoever in this area.
Satanism may be a constitutionally protected religion, but similar to another recent case at the United States Military
Straight up
Academy at
lying.
West Point. Here, charges surface connecting ritual child abuse at the Presidio Daycare Center to the devil cult. It was here, parents and others allege, that as many as 60 young children were ritualistically by soldiers of Satan.
It'd be easy to dismiss the satanic graffiti as the pranks of adolescents, taking advantage of the isolated bunkers to scare their friends or the people on the Presidio campus. But the events in the Presidio case suggested something more sinister could have been involved. When you dig into the history of the campus, one discovers that satanic goings-on were not new to the Presidio. In the early 1980s, when he was an MP or military police at the Presidio, that former officer, 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗞𝗦, recalled, quote, "We got a call from the Portola MacArthur housing area. One person reported a man dressed in black holding a little girl's hand running toward the park. Another call came in saying they heard screams near the creek." End quote. The search led to a gardener's shack at Julius Kahn Park, a strip of city-owned playground adjacent to the Presidio, behind the housing area. "We heard noise coming from the inside," Ed recalled. "We kicked the door open, and here's this nice little bedroom. In a corner was a mannequin with a gun aimed at the door. On the left, there was this bunk against the wall. There was a pentagram on the floor, a huge one. There were dolls' heads all over the ceiling. Just off-the-wall stuff," end quote. When the bunker was searched, loud music was found playing through a radio. After chasing this hooded figure that was seen running around with a little girl and finding this bizarre horror shack, 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗞𝗦 and another MP were given approval to set up a surveillance around the structure. But after a while, the investigation was called off. "We were sitting there, we've got a cult on the Presidio of San Francisco, and nobody cares about it," 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗡𝗏 said. "We were told by the provost marshal to just forget about it." Though Ed's investigation went nowhere, the child cases would raise the specter of Satanism again.
Indeed, the Army does officially recognize Satanism as a legitimate religion and supplies chaplains with this guide for ministering to the satanic soldier. Yet unofficially, some charge that Army bases have become sanctuaries for devil worshippers. Just last month, under a full moon, I took a midnight tour of the Presidio grounds with police investigator 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗞𝗦.
Are you saying that there was a satanic cult active right here on the Army base?
Yes, we believe so. There's evidence to substantiate that. They had satanic rituals going on. There's an altar in there, and all of the graffiti on the wall would indicate that.
Let's see if I can see it. How'd you find this place?
This is a fortification during World War II. During World War II, where they had gun batteries.
I can see a pentagram painted on the wall. I can see the words Prince of Darkness. On this wall, I see several inverted crosses and other obvious satanic ritualistic paintings or symbols. What actually was done to the kids?
Defecation. They were urinated on.
The former chief juvenile investigator at the Presidio, 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗏𝗏, is here. He's now a deputy sheriff in Santa Clara County.
Larry and Michelle Adams Thompson had noticed changes in their daughter's behavior after placing her in 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦's Hambright's class 4 or 5 times in September and October of 1986. Their daughter, who turned 3 in October, had begun having nightmares and would...
You can tell when see, the reason why I went off, man, because this guy, the police officer, you can tell when somebody telling the truth, man. You can tell when somebody lying. You can tell when somebody bullshitting you. They bullshitting you, man. You can tell. All you gotta do is study it a little bit. It's easy to tell. The police can tell. You know, you can tell when your kid or your son or daughter is lying to you, the way they talk and the way they look, and that got that stupid look on their face. All you gotta do is study it a little bit, and you can tell. Oh my God, yeah.
Wet herself when frightened. Her parents believed it was just a bad stage she was going through until they heard about the Tobin son in January and learned of the allegations of abuse in the daycare center. After learning of the allegations, Larry and Michelle's daughter was taken to a therapist at Letterman Army Medical Center in February 1987. In therapy, the girl talked about being abused by Gary Hambright, and also by a man named Mikey and a woman named Shambi, whose identities were unknown. This is where it gets unbelievably freaky. On August 12, 1987, the Adams-Thompsons were shopping at the PX, or Post Exchange store at the Presidio. Suddenly, the little girl ran to Larry Adams-Thompson, her father, and clutched his leg. And when Larry looked up, he saw a man who he knew as one of the most powerful people on the Presidio base, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. "Yes, that's Mikey," the 3-year-old told her father. After being taken outside, the girl added, "He's a bad man, and I'm afraid." As they were leaving the parking lot, the Adams-Thompsons saw Aquino's wife, a woman named Lilith. Larry then asked his daughter if she knew the woman. "Yes, that's 𝗟𝗡𝗡𝗞𝗦," the girl said. Immediately after this, the family went home and called the FBI. When interviewed by authorities the next day, the girl identified Gary Hambright from a photo lineup and said that she had been driven to who she referred to as Mikey and 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏's home by Gary. There, she said, at the couple's home, she was by Gary, Mikey, and 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 in a room with black walls. She said that she had been photographed during this and videotaped. She also said that Gary and Mikey were dressed in women's clothes and that 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 was dressed in man's clothes. To get a little more detailed with these accusations, it was later learned that the interview was conducted by an FBI agent on August 13th. The victim told the agent that, quote, "Mikey wears army clothes like my daddy's," and that Mikey put his into her mouth, bottom, and just like Mr. Gary. The victim also told FBI agent Foreman that she went with Mr. Gary to his house and Mikey and 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 were there. The girl also told her mother that Mikey was the blood man because he had put blood on her and licked it off her body. Mrs. Adams-Thompson also recalled that her daughter had described Mikey as having eyebrows that went up. It should be noted that Michael Aquino's appearance was distinctive. His eyebrows indeed did curl upwards in a very distinct sort of way. His hairline is marked by a prominent widow's peak, and his black hair was always worn combed straight back. When shown a photo of Aquino, the victim acknowledged that yeah, that's him and that was his appearance. In addition to the identification at the Post Exchange, the young victim also identified Aquino out of a 5-person photo lineup and a video lineup. They had gotten multiple positive identifications of an alleged perpetrator.
Paul. Here we go, y'all. My bad.
The young victim also identified Aquino out of a 5-person photo lineup and a video lineup. They had gotten multiple positive identifications of an alleged perpetrator. As it turned out, in documents released after this entire affair, it turned out that multiple children had apparently picked out Michael Aquino from a lineup and identified him as one of the The investigators, after hearing all these allegations from the young female victim, drove her to Leavenworth Street in San Francisco. The girl was asked to identify any of the houses she had been to before, and while she and the investigators were walking up the street, approaching the home where the had, according to the girl, supposedly happened, the young victim began to get visibly nervous and anxious, and began clutching her mother's leg. When the group walked past 2430 Leavenworth, the girl immediately pointed her finger and identified the house as being the home where she met Mikey and 𝗟𝗡𝗏𝗏, the house where she was the house where she said she was videotaped and assaulted with the black walls. After a short search, it turned out that the exact house that she had identified on a random street in San Francisco belonged to Michael Aquino. A search warrant was then served on the Aquino home on August 14th. In attendance were agents from the FBI and the San Francisco police. Because the allegedly occurred on city property, it has to be a city case and not a military case, at least according to local government figures. And actually, I'm going to show you a clip. We actually visited Michael Aquino's former residence on Leavenworth Street in San Francisco when we were there filming this video. So it's very, very eerie. There's a very bad negative energy there. I'm just going to let you guys watch this and make up your mind. So right now we are at one of the most important locations in all of the Presidio story, 2430 Leavenworth Street here in San Francisco. Now, this residential property was once the home of Michael Aquino, the guy who was the mind control, mind warfare specialist. And this is actually where he founded the Temple of Set, which is kind of an offshoot of the Church of Satan, a Satanist organization dedicated to the occult. This is actually the location that the San Francisco police obtained a search warrant for and executed a search warrant on in the wake of these accusations being made against Michael Aquino. Now, it begs many questions. If there was nothing to these claims, then how was the San Francisco Police Department able to secure a search warrant for this property? How did any of that happen if there was no shred of credibility to any of these claims? And how did that young victim accurately describe the interior of this building if they've never been inside of it? Interestingly, when the police raided this home, they uncovered a bunch of stuff. They included video recording equipment, VHS tapes, photographs, all sorts of material. Nobody knows what was on that stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. It's eerie. Kind of an eerie looking property if you actually take a look at it. The old chandeliers. This is the Temple of Set, a satanic hotspot, and possibly a place where some of the worst things in the history of San Francisco happened.
Somebody walking up the street.
And it's been effectively covered up, which is crazy. Interesting that there's a shitload of security cameras out front.
Is it still the church set?
I don't know. But I mean, anywhere that's got like a red door and black brick doesn't exactly look like home sweet home, happy-go-lucky Avenue. This is 2420.
So this is 2430, I guess.
Probably right here.
Yeah.
That's 2432. I think it's, yeah, there's a security camera there.
Crazy.
If only we could get inside and investigate. Ominous looking building. Yeah. All right. Let me see that. I was able to actually get a copy of the arrest warrant, which I'm not sure has ever been published before in a video like this, so I'm going to back all this stuff up with proof. As you can see in the search warrant, the officer writing all of this stuff down essentially relates the same information that I just told you to be true. The warrant discusses the victim identifying her at the PX store on the Presidio campus, and then goes into her allegations in detail. The girl had told investigators that she remembered a very distinctive bathtub inside of the home, along with a painted cross on the ceiling, a room with black walls, and more. And so the SFPD executed their warrant and made a move on Aquino and his wife. As you can see based on this warrant, the items seized from the Aquino's place included videotapes, cassette tapes, notebooks with names and addresses, 2 photo albums, 1 paper plate, and 2 plastic gloves from the kitchen garbage, 4 plastic cases of negatives, and 29 photos of costumes and masks. During the search, the FBI photographed the interior of the apartment, and some weapons, masks, and ceremonial items were observed there. And in a peculiar and somewhat troubling twist, it turned out that the 3 other apartments in the house and the house next door on Leavenworth Street weren't searched, although later investigation disclosed that Michael Aquino owned both properties. As far as I know, it was never revealed exactly what was found inside of those photo books or on those videotapes. And keep in mind, they found 36 videotapes in total. In addition, the photographs taken inside of the Aquino's residence were shown to the young female victim who had made the initial allegations on October 15, 1987. Although according to investigators, the victim's reactions to the photographs weren't fully conclusive, the pictures did show a number of items that corroborated her and other children's descriptions of the house where they were taken to and abused. Remember, the girl at first had said she was taken to this house with black walls and these people had these masks on. There were children talking about guns being pointed at them. This girl even described in her reports that she was placed into a bathtub with elephant feet, like very, very specific style of bathtub. It's in the reports, and she said that she was photographed in the while she was in this bathtub, and the investigators found a bathtub with elephant feet inside of the home, in addition to these masks, weapons, black walls, all of this stuff. This victim wasn't the only victim whose story was corroborated by the raid. You see, other children had testified about being taken to this same room, to this same house, and they had described seeing a number of different things. Masks, guns, toy animals or dinosaurs, a lion picture on the wall, and lions on the Egyptian throne, a computer, cameras, and a black room with soft walls and a robot. Every single one of those items that I just listed was named as existing inside of the apartment by a child victim before the raid was carried out. So how did all of these kids know what was in the apartment, know what it looked like, know these minute details if they'd never been there? In addition, one of the items seized by the SFPD during the search was a notebook. The notebook contained the name Mike Toto written inside of it. This was interesting because the Adams Thompson's daughter and another child victim had both mentioned Toto as being one of the persons and amongst the that they were by while at Mr. Gary's house. During an April 7, 1987 interview with Major Hickey, months before the identification that the young female victim made at the PX store, the victim stated that Shamby and Sassy were the same person and that Sassy was Toto's girlfriend. But before we go any further, we really need to do a dive into Michael Aquino.
In our investigation, we discovered that some of Satan's soldiers are also high-ranking officers in the United States military. Here at San Francisco's Presidio Army Base, for example, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino led a double life as a satanic high priest. The colonel's cult is listed in the San Francisco telephone book, and his phone answering machine boasts of his affiliation.
This is the Temple of Set. The temple is the only international satanic religious institution fully recognized by the United States government.
Dr. Aquino, the high priest of the Church of Set.
Temple of Set.
Temple of Set, also a colonel, interestingly enough, in the United States Army. What is it, this Satanism?
I think that there is some confusion tonight because this same term means something different to Satanists than it does to Christians in the United States. By our own standards, the people who you've shown in these film clips would not be Satanists, either present or in the past. Rather, they would be the failures of a conventional religion.
I appreciate your opinion. What is it, sir, then? What is Satanism?
Well, originally the Church of Satan, when it was founded, was composed not of people with a hatred for Christianity, but of people who, by and large, were agnostics and atheists, because they felt that the institutions which had arisen around Christianity had failed in their moral commitment. So Satanism itself became an emphasis on rational self-interest and on taking responsibility for your own intellectual and ethical decisions.
Rational self-interest, you call it?
Yes.
With his widow's peak and arching eyebrows, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino looks more like Dracula than a high-ranking Army officer with top security clearance. He's the founder and high priest of a satanic church, which he named the Temple of Set. Aquino's wife Lilith, a woman with long dark hair, was a priestess in the temple's self-proclaimed...
See, man, if you smart, you can turn anything into a religion. Because our government and our world represents your religion is your right until it hurts other people. I don't give a daggone. You sitting there looking like what we think is bad. The devil with the eyebrow. That's why he's saying that. And they doing it on purpose with all that black and looking like a devil. And if you got a religion, why you got to call it Satan? Because we all understand that to be negative, like the N-word or calling somebody Uncle Tom, even though Uncle Tom was a real positive, that's giving somebody a compliment when you call him Uncle Tom. But in our book, in the streets, we think we saying something bad about the person. And come find out, if you really look up Uncle Tom, something good. Anyway, that is not, look here, man. Again, the reason why these people are getting away with stuff, because you got to do all this investigation and all this type of stuff. I'm gonna wait to the end. Here we go.
Named Order of the Vampire. The couple had many times in the past referred to the search as a raid and had branded the investigation as a, quote, witch hunt.
Shoot.
The Army has known about my religion for the last 18 years and has no problem. Aquino.
See what I'm saying? They know about my religion because he called it a religion. When we was in armed security, we would grow a beard. And all you got to do is say, it's part of my religion, and they back off. Oh, sucker, Lord. Military, so suck. Boy, whatever. Y'all need to... Let me woosah.
Told the author of this original article in a telephone interview
Hurting
in late
kids.
1987, not one single person in the U.S. Army, with the exception of the chaplain, would have the remotest notion that I would be involved in anything like this, end quote. Indeed, when asked, Army spokesmen at the Pentagon have labeled Aquino's military career as extraordinary and say he's entitled to his religious beliefs.
Yes,
and that's
he
true.
is.
No matter what religion you choose to follow here in the United States, it's enshrined in your rights as an American to be able to follow that religion. And as for Aquino's top security clearance, The Army spokesman stated that Aquino's openness about being a Satanist made him much less of a security risk than a, quote, and this is a direct quote from back then, homosexual or someone with drug or money problems would be, end quote. The Army didn't suspend Aquino's clearance when he joined the Church of Satan, founded by Anton LaVey in 1969, nor when they discovered that Aquino had founded his own satanic church in 1975, nor when Aquino, while on a NATO tour of Europe in 1982, performed a satanic occult ritual in the Westphalian castle that had been used as an occult sanctuary by Heinrich Himmler's SS elite in Germany. That's right, Michael Aquino performed an occult ritual in a witch castle in Germany on a trip that was funded by NATO, and the Army didn't bat an eye. And you could probably have seen this coming. The Army also failed to move to suspend Aquino's top security clearance during the investigation. The nature of the investigation that prompted the search of his house, and I understand some of his belongings were taken by police, really is a question for the San Francisco Police Department. Major Greg Rickson, spokesman at the Pentagon, said when questioned about all of this, Michael Aquino, who eventually went to work as a programs analyst at the Army Reserve Personnel Center in St. Louis, vehemently denied up until his dying day had ever met or had the young victim in his house, who alleged he had her. He also unsuccessfully tried to have court-martial proceedings initiated against Adams Thompson, the parent of the child making the allegations. In the Temple of Set newsletter sent out 2 months after the search of his home, Aquino accused Adams Thompson, the victim's father, who's an assistant chaplain for the Army, of trumping up the allegations as some sort of Christian vendetta. Also relevant is his profession as a Christian clergyman. I certainly doubt he would have made such an outrageous accusation against any lieutenant colonel who was not known to be a prominent Satanist. End quote. In the course of my personal investigation, I was able to track down a copy of this exact newsletter, and in part it read, "What about Army Chaplain Lawrence Adams Thompson, blissfully enjoying his new assignment in Hawaii after setting in motion this malicious damage to the Temple of Set, Lilith, and myself? I've requested the Presidio commander to initiate a formal reprimand as a permanent entry in Adams Thompson's file. This again is a way of addressing the matter that would accompany formal publicity." Basically, in this newsletter, Aquino tries to demand that he's innocent. He wants everybody to know that he's innocent. He says that since the victim's father was a Christian clergyman, that meant that he had a vendetta against Michael Aquino and wanted to ruin his life. So he tried to get his daughter to make up fake satanic assault allegations, and I mean, it's just a bunch of lies and falsehoods. He's just claiming that he's being attacked for being a Satanist when it couldn't be more opposite. This investigation was brought on because he was identified by children as an abuser. But like I said,
that's the same thing that, for lack of a better word, black people would say. I don't know why I have seen so many people play that race card. So that's a card you playing, and you play it well. A lot of people play that card, man. A lot of people, y'all know it. This don't have nothing to do with you. Are just like Puffy. All this is happening on this channel because of Puffy. And I have 10 to 20, 30 people that don't even know what they talking about. They just trying to keep another black man down. That's the words that came out of their mouth. I said, a black man? What about the people that he did wrong to? Period. This don't have nothing to do with color. This don't have nothing to do with your religion. This has everything to do with hurting a little kid. And this, oh my God, should I not talk about this government? You weak. When you supposed to be strong, you are weak. I would have tore up, boy. Y'all, they know what's going on. Half of the people that make the decisions are the ones that are doing the bad. Half of the ones that's making the big decisions that can go after somebody, got their finger on the button, the go button. He's one of us. You know, I was at the party too. Oh my God, man.
A bunch of lies and falsehoods. He's just claiming that he's being attacked for being a Satanist when it couldn't be more opposite. This investigation was brought on because he was identified by children as an abuser. But like I said, if you want to read that full newsletter, which is interesting, which goes into much deeper detail on 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏's personal thoughts on this whole thing, I'd recommend checking out the link I'm posting to it in the description of this video. In addition, later on when 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 was lobbying for the Army to take action against Ādams-Thompson, the young female victim's father, he stated in a court document that the man had, quote, mailed an obscene postcard to him, which was described in the documents as bearing, quote, a picture of a male transgender stating, blow it out your ass, you pompous jerk, end quote. But 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 later withdrew the charge regarding the postcard after he learned that Ādams-Thompson and his family had already moved to Hawaii before the date the postcard was mailed. So he wasn't even in town to send the postcard, and 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 had sworn under oath that this guy had sent this postcard to him and he knew it was true. In addition, during the time when 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 was lobbying for the Army to take action against Ādams-Thompson, investigators learned that he had lied to them multiple times under oath. Here's some specific wording from the actual filed court documents. Quote, based upon these sworn charges against CPT Ādams-Thompson and other statements made by plaintiff, or 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏, as the investigation continued, CID investigated 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 for false swearing. Specifically, 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 falsely stated that the victim was 2 years old in October 1986 when she was in fact 3. 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 admitted that he incorrectly stated the victim's age, but claimed it was a mistake. 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 also stated that he had never used or been known by the nickname Mikey. But the children had claimed that he wanted to be called Mikey, that these other adults that were them referred to him as Mikey. And in addition to the children's identifications of 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 as Mikey, Mr. Anton LaVey, a friend and associate of Michael 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏, referred to him when he was being interviewed by investigators as Mikey. So it turns out very close friends of Michael 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 called him Mikey, and he was lying, saying he's never gone by that nickname. 𝗟𝗡𝗏 also made other statements controverted by evidence, including that only 3 people had access to the security code to his upper apartment, which was false, and that he had never been to the CDC, which was proven to be false. So while he was lobbying for the truth to be told, it seemed as though 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 himself was lying. Interesting, right? Well, interestingly enough, on May 15th, 1989, CID agents and legal advisors met with Lieutenant Colonel Craig Schwender, staff judge advocate for the Presidio, and viewed the investigation and evidence with him from the case against Michael 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏. Schwender at the time openly stated to the group that there was probable cause to title LTC 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 for the offenses of indecent acts with a child, conspiracy, kidnapping, and for false swearing or lying under oath. But for some reason, even though these powerful people in the military talked amongst each other and said that they probably could have charged him with things, the Army officials never followed up with this and never sought any charges. Then in April 1988, Michael 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 wrote a 4-page letter to the head of a children's advocates group in Southern California, warning that we do not intend to see a replay of what happened in Germany, when the reluctance of the Jews to challenge those who systematically and falsely accused Judaism of heinous crimes, including the sexual and ritual murder of Christian children, led to violence against them. 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 said that the Temple of Set neither prescribes nor tolerates any form of harm, sexual or otherwise, to children or animals. It's made clear in our membership publications that should we have any reason to think that a member is engaged in any such activity, he or she will be immediately expelled and reported to the appropriate law enforcement or animal protection authorities. End quote. In a February appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show in the year 1988, 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 said that Satanists are not servants of some god. We are our own gods. We are our decision makers, and people naturally fear this. Their beliefs, he said, are most closely aligned to that of Plato. To this day, neither Michael 𝗟𝗡𝗞𝗏 nor his wife were charged in connection with this case. The San Francisco police completed their investigation of the 𝗟𝗡𝗏s in June of 1988 and submitted their findings to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. A decision on whether any charges would be filed was pending when this story first went to press, but no charges were indeed ever filed. 𝗟𝗡𝗏 would eventually write a book titled _Extreme Prejudice, talking about how he was completely innocent and how he and his wife felt like they were the subject of a witch hunt for Satanists at the time. However, according to some official documents filed, despite 𝗟𝗡𝗏's contentions, this investigation was not a witch hunt. 𝗟𝗡𝗏 was not targeted because of his religious beliefs. In fact, as 𝗟𝗡𝗏 repeatedly points out in his voluminous submissions appended as part of the report of this investigation, the Army has been well aware of 𝗟𝗡𝗏's religious beliefs throughout his Army career, and they have not interfered with his religious practices. The sole reasons for this investigation and the CID decision to title plaintiff are the facts that point to 𝗟𝗡𝗏's abuse of the young Ādams-Thompson victim. In addition, this whole witch hunt narrative is kind of hard to buy into when you consider that the main accused 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦 was himself a self-proclaimed Baptist minister. But although 𝗟𝗡𝗡 proclaimed his innocence, there were other members from within 𝗟𝗡𝗡's satanic sect that wanted to go public with information about him, but never reached the exposure levels that they desired. For example, I personally did a lot of research to write this script and compile all of this information. Now let's take a look at this redacted report that I found online, otherwise known as U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command, report number 0610-88CID026-69259-5K3-6F3-6E2-6A15M2-5Y2DIMIS. Holy shit. It's a long name. In the report, on page 8, it is said that a former Temple of Set member recalled Michael Aquino mentioning a ritual chamber hidden in his apartment at 2420 Leavenworth Street. On page 32 in the report, it mentions how Michael Aquino used letters from General William Westmoreland and Senator George McGovern to defend himself from a 1972 controversy over his involvement in the Church of Satan. So he was using government powers and powers that be to get himself out of trouble. On page 42, it's noted that Michael Aquino claimed in a letter to the Army that he had never come across any contemporary account of a Christian priest conducting a black mass, despite there being such an account in a book on the Church of Satan that Michael Aquino himself wrote. This shows that Michael Aquino was comfortable not telling the truth to the authorities or in official reports under oath. On page 47, the report notes that Michael Aquino's residence contained 4 different apartments. Remember, the police and authorities only searched one of those, including one that his Temple of Set leader brother-in-law lived in. Yet only the top flat was searched by the SFPD, and the apartment that was searched by the SFPD had randomly been repainted between June 1986 and January 1987. So right after or during the time when those initial allegations that children were being brought there, sometime in that exact area, the apartment where this is all taking place is randomly being repainted. Then on page 71, it's stated that when he was asked about the colors of his home's interior prior to the SFPD search, Michael Aquino refused to answer on the advice of his lawyer. It's also noted that despite heading to Washington, D.C. at the end of July 1986 to begin classes at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, Michael Aquino not only admitted to being back in San Francisco from September 19th to 21st and December 20th to January 4th, but he had calls from his residence on August 23rd, August 26th, September 4th, and December 8th. That's the exact time period of the initial allegations made by all of these victims. On page 84 are the notes of an interview with Anton LaVey, the leader and founder of the Church of Satan. Now, this is particularly interesting because in one passage, an interaction is described. Essentially, it's an anecdote about a woman who visited Michael Aquino at his home in Santa Barbara. The woman describes the incident, saying that at one point, Aquino began playing very loud music, then stepped out of the living room, then returned completely in the wearing only a creepy, demonic-looking mask. The woman stated she refused his advances on her and said that his conduct was unacceptable. In the search of Michael Aquino's apartment, a similar mask was recovered by investigators corroborating the story. On pages 88 and 89 are the notes of interviews with Linda Blood, a former member of the Temple of Set. Now, while the former member states that she never saw children at any ritual, she also discusses some extremely inappropriate and graphic advances and behaviors that Michael Aquino exhibited towards her, basically exposing him as a freaky guy, if you get what I'm saying. On pages 90 and 91 are the notes of an interview with the former Temple of Set member who mentioned those rumors of Michael Aquino getting excited by activity, real freaky stuff. This ex-Temple of Set member also claimed that at one point Michael Aquino told him about a hidden ritual chamber in his apartment. He also notes that year 1 in the Temple of Set literature refers to 1966. On page 91 are the notes of an interview with somebody who visited the Aquino's property in April or May 1986 in his official capacity, and recalled that the front room had walls of a dark color, possibly black, which once again corroborated victim testimony. On page 91 are the notes of an interview with someone who installed a security system at the Aquino's property sometime in early 1986, and recalled a padded room on the upper level and dark rooms, once again corroborating the stories of these victim children. On page 114, it mentions the CID being contacted by a detective from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Department, who reported that a victim in a ritual case they had worked had independently identified Michael Aquino as being a perpetrator. And the investigators noted that the prime suspect in their investigation lived very close nearby where Michael Aquino was currently assigned. It's pointed out that this prime suspect was a former U.S. Navy member. This serves to link multiple allegations of ritual not only to Michael Aquino, but to the Presidio as a whole as well. On page 114, it mentions a probation officer at the Verdemont Boys Ranch in San Bernardino County, California, reporting that one of her probationers claimed his brother was involved with the Temple of Set in Lake Arrowhead, California, and claims that 2 suspects in a kidnapping trial in the area may have been linked to the group. And on pages 124 and 125, the entire section about whether Michael Aquino had contact with other suspects or victims mentioned in the report is completely redacted. The government has still to this day deemed that information too damning, too explosive to show off to us regular members of the public. Very interesting. The only time you redact the document is when you have something to hide. Make of that what you will.
Ted Gunderson, respected law enforcement professional, recently or retired now from the FBI, former regional director of Los Angeles. Do you, sir, believe that these dreadful allegations of babies being sacrificed are true?
I absolutely believe it, without any doubt. Based on the information that's been given to me across the country by numerous survivors and by confidential sources and informants.
Then why didn't you name these people?
And by parents who had these babies. And by parents who had, y'all think this ain't going on? That's bull. Y'all know it's going on. The government know it's going on. All the governments know it's going on. And they want to act. They want to act, y'all. They want to act like they don't know. They know. They know that we know that they know. But they want to act like, well, we don't have evidence, or that's not our jurisdiction, or whatever. I go with the 3 strikes you out. Let it be one of my kids or one of my. Let that I be in the military trying to fight for rights. And y'all are violating my rights. You mean to tell me this man, my daughter, my son, that's the closest relationship right there. 3 strikes you out. If they 100% beyond a reasonable doubt tell me 3 different things, like them elephants in a bathtub, and they saying, yeah, elephants in the bathtub. Well, you was right. How would she know that if she wasn't there or he wasn't there? You ain't stupid. That's 1 strike right there. Boy, you got 2 more left before I kirk off on you. I would have seen him out in the middle of the street and had me a bat, and I would have, Woosah, Mike. Woosah, Mike. I get a Lord. I just get a Lord. It's kids, man. Oh my gracious. I'd be sitting right in jail. You don't have to come pick me up after I done hurt. You don't have to come pick me up. I would go right to the jail and say, look here, this is what I did. Let me sit here, because y'all stupid people gonna lock me up when he doing all the wrong. So I sit here because I don't want to participate in this world if that's what y'all gonna do. I'd rather sit in the, well, at least the Lord told me to help these kids. I don't mind going to jail for what I believe in.
Retired now from the FBI, former regional director of Los Angeles. Do you, sir, believe that these dreadful allegations of babies being sacrificed are true?
I absolutely believe it, without any doubt. Based on the information that's been given to me across the country by numerous survivors and by confidential sources and informants.
Then why didn't you name these people and arrest them? Never a name, never an arrest. These women come out of a group and they insist that they know the people in the group, and yet they do not identify these large, mysterious cults. Name them and arrest them and get them off the street.
Does he not make a valid point?
He makes a valid point. The problem with that is, number one, police officers don't believe it. I may believe it. You may believe it. Some people in your audience may believe it. They don't believe it. Number two, if you decide to investigate these people, you have to, number one, handle it from an undercover operation. If you put an undercover operation into effect, then you have, in a sense, your own police officers become involved in these heinous crimes, and they are, of course, become murderers. And in addition to that, if you do decide to investigate these people, it's a lot of work. And many law enforcement officers are apathetic and don't want to get involved.
But even with all this information, nothing came of this. And eventually, the Ādams-Thompsons and their daughter found themselves moving out of the state of California to attempt to begin a new life.
They don't want to get involved. Before you get to this next point, they don't want to get involved. The government and the police got to play by the book. These people don't have to play by no books. They have no rules. They can twist and lie and do whatever they call themselves a religion. Any religion that lies, cheats, steals, and hurt other people, I don't want to be a part of. It's us against them. And we got all these rules we got to go by. Or do we? Who made up these rules? They man-made rules. You think God made up the rules? All we got to do is go by his book, not by this Constitution. I keep telling people, I don't like this Constitution. This Constitution is set up so we can lose. Think about it.
And they are, of course, become murderers. And in addition to that, if you do decide to investigate these people, it's a lot of work. And many law enforcement officers are apathetic.
It's time to do the work.
Get involved.
But even with all this information, nothing came of this. And eventually, the Ādams-Thompsons and their daughter found themselves moving out of the state of California to attempt to begin a new life. At the time that this original article was published, the Ādams-Thompsons were stationed at a post in Hawaii and said that their daughter's nightmares and bedwetting had stopped. They also said that their daughter had not given up. She still believes that someday some judge will hear all the facts and do right by her. Michelle Ādams-Thompson, her mother, said, "A lot of people were not as brave as her." But once again, if you think that that's the end of this story, it's not. At 4:45 a.m. on September 22nd, 1987, in the middle of this unfolding Presidio daycare scandal, just over a month after the raid on Michael Aquino's satanic temple, and when all of this was reaching a fever pitch, a call came into the Presidio Fire Department. A building in the complex of structures at the Presidio that houses the daycare center was set on fire. By the time parents started dropping their children off at 7 a.m., the $500,000 fire had been extinguished. The Army Community Services building adjacent to the daycare center, which housed some of the daycare center's records, had been demolished by the flames. And perhaps, only coincidentally, maybe not, the fire occurred on the autumnal equinox, a major event on the satanic calendar. An investigation of the fire by the Army blamed the blaze on a faulty wire outlet, but that was just conjecture. I personally haven't come across any documents or information where they stated how they made this determination, and in fact, you can barely find any information about this fire save for a single newspaper article and the original report that I'm adapting here for this episode. But think about that for a second. A suspicious fire in the middle of these investigations and search warrants and allegations, a fire in a building that houses tons of records. Who knows how top secret these records are, dealing with the child care center. Strange. But it seemed like the flames of hell were really heating up, because just 3 weeks later, fire struck again. This time at the daycare center itself. The fire was reported at 4:30 a.m. and it caused $50,000 in damages to a daycare center building that housed 4 classrooms, including 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦. It also damaged and destroyed any future crime scene or evidence that could have possibly been investigated if the authorities actually would have ever acted on any of this. Now faced with 2 fires, at this point, the Army called in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for help. And here's where things get interesting. This new group of expert investigators found that both fires, contrary to the Army's finding, had been caused by arson. They also found cinders under a different building, evidence of a third attempted but unsuccessful fire at the Child Development Center. The Army later offered a $5,000 reward for any information about the arsonists, but to this day, there were never any takers. And eventually, shortly after that last debilitating fire, right when all this stuff was heating up, in the middle of all these charges and swirling accusations, the building was demolished. So, this wasn't after this whole thing finished up. This was in the middle of these investigations when people were all still coming forward and parents were in the media begging for help. The Child Daycare Center, Child Development Center burns to the ground. Now, that's pretty weird if you ask me.
That
On
ain't
September
weird.
30th, 1987, 8 days after the first fire and 6 months
know
after
what it
the
is.
original charges had been dropped, 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, the former Baptist minister and guy that all the allegations had been made against, was re-indicted on charges involving 10 children at the Presidio. He was charged with 10 counts of lewd and lascivious contact on a and 2 counts of The indictment included the Tobin's son who started this whole thing, but didn't include the original charge of That day, there was much backslapping at a press conference called by U.S. Attorney Joseph Rusinello to announce the charges. A press release said that the maximum penalty that might be imposed in this case is 96 years in prison and a $3 million fine. Surrounded by Army brass from the Presidio and several FBI agents, Rusinello said there would be no more arrests, that despite the children's allegations, there were no other suspects. Rusinello himself was an intelligence asset and a crooked guy, but we'll get to him later. He's done some really dark stuff in the past that we're also about to expose. But amidst all these events, even 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, the main accused himself, appeared to suggest that others had been involved in the abuse. At a press conference on October 2nd, after he was arraigned, 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, reading from a prepared statement, said that he was innocent of all the charges and added, "I cannot understand why these allegations and falsehoods have been directed solely at me." This implies that there were others involved. This comment has never, though, to my knowledge, been followed up on. Jeff Hansen, the assistant federal public defender who represented 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦 at the time, refused to allow his client to answer any questions, a policy unbroken throughout the long months after the indictment. No one was allowed to ask Gary anything. Jeff Hansen denied, however, that Gary was referring to anyone else. Do you think he was threatened after that initial statement into remaining silent? Could he have been silenced or paid a midnight visit by a high-level agent with a loaded weapon? God only knows. The parents of the victims at the time had many questions about the new indictment. Why only those 10 children, when there were dozens of total victims? Why only one child on the indictment who had medical evidence? Why did the indictment not include the children with such medical evidence, such as missing and lesions? And why were the charges so vague? Yes, you heard that correctly. Over the course of all these investigations, in addition to the Tobin son who started this all off, other children had been physically examined for signs of sexual abuse. And those signs were discovered. They included missing and lesions and tearing, but those kids weren't included in this indictment for some reason, even though they had made allegations against the same abuse. Rather than specifying the actual crimes allegedly committed on the children, 10 of the 12 charges were for committing lewd and lascivious acts. The other 2 charges, involving the Tobin son and the boy who was abused on his birthday, were. In addition, 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦 no longer was charged with the Tobin son, even though he had been examined almost immediately after making those first allegations and was found to have had damage to his. The Tobin son, the only child with medical evidence on the indictment, was included because he had been examined by CASARC, by a non-Army doctor off post. As it turned out, cooperation between the Army and the U.S. Attorney had been very weak from the very beginning. Remember those 5 children that all tested positive for chlamydia, that all claimed that they had been abused by adults at the daycare center? Well, it was ruled that the cases of chlamydia could not be used as evidence because apparently the right kind of culture had not been taken at Letterman Army Medical Center. When one couple called the U.S. Attorney's office to ask if they should take their children for another culture, the answer was no. The reason for why they weren't allowed to retest their children for STDs in order to prove their allegations of abuse was never made clear. So they ruled it inadmissible, all these positive STD tests inadmissible because of a very specific technicality. Then when these concerned parents asked if they could, embrace that technicality and get their children retested, they just simply said no. Why? Assistant U.S. Attorney Peter Robinson, who had been brought in by then to assist Susan Gray, said those 10 children had been chosen from the more than 60 victims because they would make the best witnesses. They were basically saying that they believed 10 victims and that the other 50 plus victims could possibly have just been making it all up. In February, Assistant U.S. Attorney Gray, now teamed with Assistant U.S. Attorney 𝗟𝗡𝗚𝗞𝗦, asked the charges involving 4 of the children be dismissed because of problems with the children's testimony. It seemed like the cover-up was already up and running, and investigators were deliberately attempting to poke holes in the children's stories to destabilize and bring their testimonies into question. Later in the month, Judge Schwartzer dismissed all but one of the remaining counts because the charges were too vague. Gray and Robinson had submitted a 2-page document listing a series of dates on which the abuse allegedly occurred for each child, but did nothing further to spell out the accusations. This was in direct contrast to the testimony and information that it is publicly known that the authorities had. The testimony of feces parties, the allegations of hardcore ritualistic of weapons being pointed at young victims during assaults. They had all of this information, but the authorities had done everything in their power at this point to tear down this case before it could be prosecuted, and they'd done an excellent, expert job at that. The only remaining witness on the indictment, the Tobin son, was also eventually removed from the case a short time later, on the advice of the boy's therapist. He claimed that he didn't want the young child to have to go through all of this again, and so they withdrew him from the case. And with that, 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, the accused, was a free man again. He had now beaten 2 rounds of accusations that had ramped up into pending charges, and he was allowed to walk free. You see, the strategy for a simple case had failed once again. Gray, the daughter of a district court judge, was documented at the time to have never before handled a child case. This was her first, and she seemingly got anything and everything in the case wrong. The Presidio case, in fact, was believed to be the first such case of its kind handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco, and they butchered the entire thing from top to bottom. Gray had worked long and hard on the case, but confined her efforts to the law library. Neither Gray nor anyone else in the U.S. Attorney's Office saw the need at any point to hire experts on child abuse cases until about 2 months before the end of this entire affair. Yes, no one on any of these teams reached out to experts. No one tried to bring in other professionals who could help, who could analyze the children and the allegations. There had been a telephone consultation with Dr. Roland Summit, an associate clinical psychiatrist at Harbor UCLA Medical Center and a consultant in major sex abuse cases around the country, but that was it. He said, "I reviewed some early documents in the case. On the basis of the documents, they didn't want to go to court. There were too many allegations of weirdness and ritual without enough corroborating evidence. It is that kind of thing so far that is fatal to effective prosecution." End quote. Dr. Roland Summit, who was consulted on a number of ritual cases, said that the failure in such cases is a scandal, that we have to see some sort of material proof to get any sincere concern to what 300 to 500 children have sworn in the midst of terror was real. If you had 300 adults in any circumstance, wherever they were assembled, who would describe the same phenomenon, nobody would want to believe it, but I don't think the justice system could possibly be that indifferent. The smart move for any attorney is to stay away from it and try to sneak through by selecting witnesses who don't talk about it. Are you going to put somebody in jail on the word of a little kid? He was quoted as saying. Failure to consult with abuse experts haunted the case from beginning to end. By the time the children had been in therapy long enough and felt comfortable enough to talk about some of the more bizarre aspects of the case, Prosecutor Gray was adamant that she could not take such things before a jury. "She sat right here on that couch and she said she couldn't take that before a jury," said one mother. Gray, in the wake of this affair, refuses to discuss the case. She stayed silent and, to my knowledge, personally, has never spoken about the Presidio affair again. It seems that everyone involved in these horrific events has been sworn to secrecy or threatened into silence. Gray's colleague, Assistant U.S. Attorney Luckel, said that the case fell apart at the end because, in the final analysis, when we reviewed the cases we had where there was a child who was prepared to go to court and was prepared to tell us what happened and describe something that actually occurred at the Presidio, as opposed to off base, there wasn't much to consider. According to Luckel, the U.S. Attorney's Office had decided that federal jurisdiction in the case ended at the boundaries of the Presidio. That meant that even though some of the allegations involved children being taken off post by 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, they were not a part of the federal case. When we got right down to it, there were just a couple of possible cases where federal jurisdiction existed. Luckel said, "Our decision was that we could only prosecute for acts that occurred at the Presidio," which is stupid as hell and an easy way to cover stuff up. Since San Francisco police concentrated their efforts on investigating Michael Aquino, and essentially Michael Aquino alone, that meant that many of the children's allegations fell through the legal cracks. More than 60 children were sexually abused, and they almost admitted that that was true, but they just weren't abused at the right location, according to the prosecutors. So, is the Presidio case closed? We would not reopen it absent the discovery of new evidence, Luckel said. And this was in 1988. The statute of limitations for this case is 5 years. That means that the ability to prosecute this case essentially almost vanished in 1993. On April 19, 1988, the Army held an open house for a new $2.3 million daycare center at the Presidio campus. That same day, several parents held a press conference to protest the closing of the federal case. They refused to be silenced. "We feel that it's vitally important that parents everywhere realize these things really happen," the parents said in a prepared statement. "Cases such as this are being successfully prosecuted across the country at the state level. Why have Mr. Rusinello and the entire federal system failed to learn from these successes?" they said. Referring to the victims, the parents said, "All have made statements that they were abused. They have psychological evidence of abuse, and many have documented medical evidence of sexual abuse, including rape, and venereal disease. But all their cries, all their pleas fell on deaf ears. The criminal case is closed." But by June of 1988, the parents of 23 children had filed $55 million in claims against the Army. the first step toward filing a civil suit against the government, alleging negligence that led to the Eventually, that number swelled to $74 million in claims, but nothing ever really came from it. There was no justice, there were no big payouts, there was no guilt admitted. In December of 1987, the Army reassigned several people connected with the case, including Lieutenant Colonel Walter Meyer, the Director of Personnel and Community Activities, and John Gunnarsson, the Director of Child Development Services, responsible for supervising the day-to-day operations at the center. Diana Curl, the daycare center director who heard those first allegations, resigned. And in late June 1988, Gary Hambright was still trying to decide where he wanted to settle, and friends of his claimed he was in and out of San Francisco. In 1990, Gary Hambright died of AIDS. He never served a single day in prison for the of those children that he had allegedly participated in. Here's a newspaper article written by the same reporter, Linda Goldston, about Gary upon his death. A former civilian employee of the center, Gary apparently tried to keep his illness secret. When questioned by the Mercury News last spring, he denied he was ill and said, "I'm going to have to refer you to my attorneys on that." His death certificate, which was filed in Washington state, lists acquired immune deficiency syndrome as the cause of death. The time between onset of the disease and death was listed as years. It's not the first time that parents involved in the case have worried that their children may have been exposed to the AIDS virus. Shortly after the case broke, one boy's preliminary test came back positive, but further tests revealed that the child did not have the disease and the issue was dropped. Last spring, Army officials recommended that children be tested for the AIDS virus, citing a rumor that a suspect in the case had the disease. "We tested every kid that was brought in," said Presidio spokesman Bob Mahoney. "That was done worldwide because the victims and their families were all dispersed." Officials have said confidentiality laws prevent them from discussing either the number of children tested or the results of those tests. Mahoney said Thursday that it would be inappropriate to comment on Hambright's death. Jeff Hansen and Nancy Clarence, the federal public defenders who represented Hambright, said they both genuinely regret the news of Gary's death. "We're deeply sorry that he spent the last years of his life fighting baseless charges." Ugh. U.S. Attorney Joseph Rusinello made the decision not to prosecute the case in 1988 after a federal judge dismissed the second set of charges because they were too vague. Rusinello's decision later drew sharp criticism from a congressional subcommittee. He could not be reached Thursday for comment. In addition to the allegations of Presidio, 3 arson fires were set at the daycare center and 5 children were diagnosed with chlamydia, a transmitted disease. Since the case began, parents have accused authorities of attempting to cover up the allegations of including the number of victims. Parents have maintained that more than 60 children were. One FBI document said as many as 102 children may have been victimized. The Army has refused to say how many cases were reported. The case that so many did not want to believe is still very much alive in the nightmares and acting out that continue for many children, in the jarring statements that come suddenly out of nowhere, such as,
Why do the government hide so much information that this is not a threat to our land? You understand what I'm saying? It ain't like we asking for the codes to the nuclear bombs. We ain't asking for that. We don't care about that. That's your stupidity. Why are you, how many cases been, well, that is none of your business. That's what the government's saying to us, and it is our business. What is wrong with these people? I don't understand, man. I just don't understand.
Case that so many did not want to believe is still very much alive in the nightmares and acting out that continue for many children, in the jarring statements that come suddenly out of nowhere, such as the 4-year-old girl attached to the case who sat at her kitchen table a few months ago and told her mother that she wanted to with a knife. Other children who claim they were now say that they hate themselves to their parents. One 6-year-old girl who was a victim was playing with modeling clay at school one day when she suddenly started stabbing it. "Mr. Gary is bad, and I'm bad because I let him do it," she told her teacher. "People keep telling us we've got to let it go. Just forget about it and go on," said parent Gretchen Runyon. 2 of the Runyons' 4 daughters were among the victims. Both had confirmed cases of chlamydia. 3 weeks ago, our youngest daughter was having nightmares, and our other daughter was closing out the whole world, going to her room and sitting there with no radio, no TV, no nothing. Tell me it's over. And that is kind of really at the end of our Presidio story. This was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but I hope you guys can appreciate the level of detail that we went into this whole thing. So you can either view this whole thing as going one of 2 ways. Either the happened or it didn't happen. After taking in all of this evidence that I've presented you with and listening to these stories, if you still don't believe that a single child was used on the Presidio campus, then I simply just don't know what to tell you. There's so many things that just don't add up with the official story here. There's the fact that a victim picked out Michael Aquino and his wife on the street and identified them by name. There's the fact that multiple parents and employees witnessed on the campus of the Presidio, tried to raise an alarm about it, and were silenced. There's the fact that a man in a black hooded cape was seen by police officers running around the Presidio campus late at night with a little girl by their side. There's the weird cult graffiti, the melted candles, and the obvious signs of rituals that were taking place in the abandoned buildings on the Presidio campus. The victim who identified Michael Aquino's house while walking down the street. The search warrant that was executed on the Aquino's home that corroborated victims' stories. How exactly were these children able to identify very strange and distinct items and features inside of a home where they had supposedly never been before? There's also the case of the chlamydia, the allegations just in general from the children, the fire that completely destroyed the daycare center in the middle of the investigation, and all of the evidence, everything else that just didn't add up. All the statements from people saying don't look into this, the people saying this was never looked into, the people that were let go, let free, the charges that were dropped. I mean, all of that stuff is so crazy and so clear, and yet, according to the official story, the story that the government would tell you today, not one single child was abused at the Presidio during this affair. But there were still other people involved in these cases that had yet to share their stories, people that would speak publicly about these events. For example, there's an interview with a woman named Cynthia Angel, a local lawyer in the area at the time, who was interviewed in the book Children for the Devil by Tim Tate. Here's an excerpt of her interview. She said, "That January in 1988, I became involved in a civil lawsuit. I represented a man who was fighting his ex-wife for custody of his children, a 5-year-old boy and his 3-year-old sister. Sometime into the proceedings, the children showed evidence that they had been sexually abused. The little girl, in particular, showed medical signs that were consistent with an object being forced inside her. She had 2 lacerations inside her, and the pediatrician said there was no possibility of them being self-inflicted since they would have caused extreme pain. Her brothers showed strong psychological signs of a severe traumatization, and it gradually emerged in counseling that both had been ritually abused. They started describing horrendous acts that they had been forced to take part in. They had sex with animals. They described being forced to drink blood. They also talked about witnessing people being killed and having their blood drained from them. The children had been at the Presidio daycare center, and so I began asking about the facility there. I was vaguely aware that there had been allegations of ritual abuse at the center, but I couldn't be sure that the abuse these children described to their therapist actually took place there. The kids said a man named Michael Aquino was present and involved in the ceremonies they had been forced to attend. They told their mother this, and since I had made enquiries about the Presidio and come up with the name of Michael Aquino, I asked the mother to confirm the details. She refused, and so I was left having to call as a witness when the case went to trial. When the case went to trial, the person who had reported the disclosure in the first place. Simultaneously, I made formal enquiries about issuing a subpoena to get Michael Aquino in court and on the stand. I have no way of knowing if he was genuinely involved in the abuse. I do know, however, that the children were in the Presidio daycare center and identified someone who appeared to be him. The case was due to go to start on February 1st, 1989. The night before that first hearing, I got a telephone call from a woman who was going to be a key witness. She asked me to meet her at a restaurant on the main street here in Red Bluff because she had some important information for me. I agreed, got in my car, and drove downtown. When I got to the restaurant, she wasn't there, but before I could even get out of the car, 2 men got in through the passenger side. One pointed a gun at my head and told me to drive out of town. I was made to drive about 4 miles out of town, and at that point, I was blindfolded and put into a second car and driven somewhere else. During the course of this kidnapping, which lasted about 3 hours in total, I was told that I was investigating things that I shouldn't be investigating, and that if I continued with it, I would be killed. During this kidnapping, Cynthia alleged that she was shown photographs and videos that were meant to threaten her into keeping silent. She stated, the picture was of its skin had been partially peeled away, and the men made it clear that the child had been killed in a satanic ritual. The tape seemed to back this up. It contained children's voices, children crying, and adults chanting. The chanting was not articulate. I couldn't tell you what they said, but the men made it clear that this was a satanic ritual and that I should stop investigating Satanism if I wanted to stay alive. They also said that if I told anyone what I saw that night, or if I reported the kidnapping to the authorities, they would surely kill me. I was terrified, of course, but I felt I had to report it, and I had to carry on with the case. The kidnapping was reported in local news outlets at the time, but nothing ever came out of it. In fact, here's another newspaper report detailing the search for the kidnappers. A reward of $10,000 is offered for the arrest and conviction of a man who allegedly abducted a Red Bluff attorney at gunpoint in a child custody case that may be linked to Satanism and ritualistic. That's the only motive we can see, Red Bluff Detective Ted Wiley said today of the February 2nd kidnapping of Cynthia Angel. Mrs. Angel and her husband, Anthony Edwards, also an attorney, are offering the reward. The man allegedly threatened Miss Angel's life several times if she continued to investigate links between a 𝗗𝗢𝗡𝗞𝗦 County child custody case and a San Francisco Bay Area children's day school. The man told Miss Angel that she was investigating something that she couldn't and showed her a photograph of a baby whose skin had been partially removed, Wiley said. It looked like it could have been an autopsy photo, but the man said it was a child who had been killed during a satanic ritual. Mrs. Angel told police. Neither Miss Angel nor Red Bluff Police Detective Ted Wiley would disclose further details of the child custody case today. However, Wiley said a composite drawing and description of the man who allegedly kidnapped Mrs. Angel resembles a man reportedly involved in a case in which a child or doll was seen from a signpost on Kirkwood Road near Corning on July 29, 1987. In that case, a man who identified himself as a police officer told a concerned citizen that everything was under control, while another man and woman removed the child or doll from the signpost. Very bizarre. So this is me breaking out of the article. Another case of weird shit. A concerned citizen saw from a signpost, like a street sign, what looked like either a dead little child or a baby doll from that signpost. And when they went up to try to figure out what was happening, someone identified themselves as a police officer, and a man and woman were seen removing the thing from the signpost. Really weird. Police artist Marjorie Casebeer initially noticed similarities between suspects in the two cases as she was drawing the man Miss Angel described. 𝗗𝗢𝗡𝗞𝗦 County Sheriff's Captain Alan Grove said today there are some dissimilarities between the two composite drawings, but would not rule out that the two suspects could be the same man. The case is definitely still open, Grove said. On February 2nd, on a satanic holiday called Candlemas, Miss Angel arranged to meet a potential witness at a Red Bluff restaurant for lunch. When she arrived at the restaurant, a man she did not recognize entered her car, pulled a pistol, and ordered her to drive to Derryville. And you know the rest of what happened. So that's insane. But it still gets weirder. It appears to this day individuals connected to the Presidio case are still afraid to speak out. For example, citing his article, Do What Thou Wilt, Satanism in the Temple of Set, from September-October 1995 in the Haight-Ashbury Free Press, reporter David Hoffman claimed the following about a man who seemed to be Glenn Pamphloff, an infamous detective in San Francisco. Quote, as recently as 1995, the SFPD detective in charge, who I interviewed, was still too frightened to reveal details of the case. End quote. And this silence has carried on to the present day. In fact, in 2017, some independent journalists attempted to gather any information that they could about the Presidio scandal by filing a Freedom of Information Act request, a request which should have allowed them access to the files and documents because, according to the authorities, the case is closed. However, this was the response they were given. Quote, the SFPD replied to your public records request on October 11, 2017 via GovQA, the SFPD's public records portal. You were notified that the case you are inquiring into is open at this time, and that any records are exempted from release under California Government Code Section 6254F. On February 15, 2017, you contacted legal assistant Elsa Campos to inquire into the SFPD's denial to release any records to you pertaining to the investigation of child abuse at the Presidio Child Development Center during the 1980s. Ms. Campos advised you that she must consult with her superiors before providing you with any further information. Please be advised that although this case is currently closed/inactive, it can potentially be reopened in the future if other victims come forward. Therefore, the SFPD cannot jeopardize any potential future investigation by releasing case information. During your conversation with Ms. Campos, you also inquired into the fact that the statute of limitations for the case has expired, and therefore, case information should be releasable. Please note that the statute of limitations is 5 years from the time the sexual assault is reported to the authorities. So, for those victims that have not come forward, they still have the right to absolute privacy. Furthermore, the SFPD has ultimately determined that the information you requested will not be released to you because the case you're inquiring into involves the alleged sexual assault of juvenile victims, and information cannot be released without a court order. Very strange, right? I thought that nothing happened there. Very, very bizarre. It's a very ingenious defense for them. When you say, oh, this case could be open in the future, it's closed right now. Like we said, nothing happened, but just in case one of these victims ever comes back, we can't share any information with you, just in case. Oh, and you're talking about the statute of limitations? Well, here's a little loophole. And also, on top of all that stuff, it's a juvenile claim, so we're just not going to share it with you. There's also this excerpt from the book Painted Black by Carl Raschke, which discusses the Presidio case. Those particular charges were later dropped against Aquino and his associate. Parents of the children who were allegedly said it was because of strong pressure from the Army on the federal investigators and the San Francisco police. Prosecutors blamed the well-known difficulties of prosecuting child cases in the first place. But just before this book went to press, however, authoritative sources within the military who requested anonymity reported that another investigation of Aquino had been opened by civilian law enforcement in California. In addition, in the same book, the author posits 22 families filed $66 million in personal injury claims against the Army in connection with the Presidio case. Although charges against Aquino were dismissed, 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, who was arraigned in the case, pleaded innocent and suggested he might be taking the rap for others possibly involved in the alleged. After long legal maneuvering and bickering between Army and federal investigators and the San Francisco police, the case against 𝗟𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦 was shelved as well. So,
I'm trying to figure out, wait a minute, so what?
At the end of the day, what do you make of this? Do you believe that Michael Aquino was an innocent man? He died in 2020. Which direction do you think he was sent to? Do you believe that there really wasn't a single child at the Presidio, as these officials?
No kid. No kid is going to go that's been brought up in a happy home and they are loved by their parents and the parents have disciplined them and, spank them on the hand, tell them that good girl, and they start raising them. And the kid says thank you. The kid says thank you. And the parents go, yay, show them love. That's understanding right from wrong. And then all of a sudden you get this, he's a bad guy, he's bad. These kids don't know how to say, mommy, this dude, they just, as a kid. So as a parent, you got to believe and you got to do something, man. We need a third, like a third eye. I really, really believe that you got the government and everybody trying to do things right. We need a third, the gray area. 3 strikes you out. If we got solid proof 3 different times that this person is bad, he need to go. He got to go. And the government can't lock him up because this stuff, they ain't sticking. Because you following these rules. They ain't got no rules. You following these rules and the stuff don't stick. That's when you call the 3 strike you out crew. And the whole government, a whole world got to stand behind them and say, look, man, if you got to go, you got to go. Oh, man. Something got to change. Something got to change, man. It's like, that's just like the P. Diddy. 3 strikes you out, not 120 cases. Are y'all sure? We got to get all this evidence. These people all you got to do is hide the evidence and allegedly this and allegedly that, and I'm good. I can do wrong in this world because they don't have jurisdiction, or this came across the line, or somebody didn't sign the daggone affidavit. They didn't sign the daggone search warrant, or they didn't get the right search warrant. This says they searching for this, and but I had kids. They were searching for adults. All this bull. Okay, he did wrong. Bunch of bullshit. Bull that we did. I didn't mean to say the S word, but I'm pissed off. So then you call the 3 strike you out team. Look here, man. We got 1 more, 2 more. I think we got 2 more. I'm sorry, yeah. This is an hour and 18 minutes. We got some things that's coming up on the channel, man, and I get real passionate about this stuff, and I apologize. Sometimes, I got to woo-saw myself, and I'm trying my best, but I can't wait to get the street team together. Y'all stay tuned for part 3 Y'all take it light, take it slow. Tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Where are these kids, man? 500,000 people, 500,000 kids. Where are the kids? I know it's something in my area. I know I can feel it. And we're going to do something about it, man. That's all I got to say. We're going to do something about it. I ain't going to sit here. No. We're going to do something, y'all. Peace out.